Hello and welcome. I am Kelsey Atwood, Tour and Public Program Manager of the American Revolution Institute of the Society of the Cincinnati, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our July 2nd concert. The American Revolution Institute promotes knowledge and appreciation of the achievement of American independence by supporting advanced study, exhibitions and public programs, and providing resources to classrooms. Today we are joined by David and Ginger Hildebrand, specialists in researching, recording, and performing early American music. Since 1980, they have presented concerts and educational programs throughout the country for museums, public schools, and universities. In 1999, along with dance historians Kate Van Winkle and Robert Keller, they founded the Colonial Music Institute, which conducts and promotes research and educational outreach in the fields of early American music and dance.
Hi, we're David and Ginger Hildebrand. Welcome to our home. I'm so sorry we can't be at the elegant Anderson House tonight.
As we have been the past 13 years or so on the 2nd of July to help celebrate the anniversary of the day John Adams suggested we should mark of deciding to declare our independence from Great Britain. We begin with a piece in honor of the Society's central figure, George Washington. A song with new words appears in 1801 up in Newport, Rhode Island, at a gathering of the Society. And with this, we open our program. Hark, freedom's silver horn pours on the peerless morn, the festive May. Ye sons of bold emprise, from peaceful slumbers rise, awake with glad surprise to hail the day. Ye peers of Washington, like him and Rome's best son, be peace your aim. The plow or falchion wield, your native country shield, the Senate or the field gives equal fame. Columbia weeps, her Cincinnati sleeps in Vernon's grave. Yet still his spirit guides, high o'er our state presides, and on the thunder rides with power to save. The melody, of course, chosen for these words is quite familiar to many. It dates back to 1745. God Save the King appears in the British press. By the 1760s, though, in America, there are new versions of this melody showing up, honoring Benjamin Franklin, for instance. By the Revolution, there's God Save Great Washington and God Save the 13 States. Not till 1831 is the American official version, My Country 'Tis of Thee, written. We'll be interpreting not just these songs, but their backgrounds and their connections to American history through the program.
The instruments that we're using were all used in colonial America. This, of course, is a harpsichord, the keyboard instrument of the time, and this is a violin. Violins have changed very, very little, but the people who play them have changed. In the 18th century, it was not fashionable for a woman to play the violin, so I must apologize that I'm the one playing. You definitely don't want to hear David be playing the violin.
In fact, our gender roles are perfectly reversed because the spinet, or harpsichord, was considered very much a lady's instrument. The Washingtons, the Carrolls here in Maryland, for instance, by the 1750s, they owned these smaller spinet-style harpsichords. And then into the Revolutionary period, they upgraded to the lovely, large, double manual grand harpsichords. The one that we're playing here is a reproduction of one very similar to that the Washingtons began with at Mount Vernon. This original was built in 1720, the copy now built about 23 years ago, and they're a pleasure to play. About a decade before the Revolution, Benjamin Franklin sailed across the ocean to represent the colonists in front of Parliament. He was severely rebuked for suggesting that the colonists had some say over these taxes. In fact, he was reminded that Great Britain was the mother and that the North American colonies were just children. So it's not surprising that in Benjamin Franklin's own hand, he preserved a song called The Mother Country that outlines this relationship of the mother and the young child. We have an old mother that peevish is grown. She snubs us like children that scarce walk alone. She forgets we're grown up and have sense of our own, which nobody can deny, which nobody can deny. If we don't obey orders, whatever the case, she frowns and she chides and she loses all patience. And sometimes she hits us a slap in the face, which nobody can deny, which nobody can deny. Her orders so odd are we often suspect that age has impaired her keen intellect. But still an old mother should have due respect, which nobody can deny, which nobody can deny. No to you bad neighbors that aim to divide the sons from the mother, that still she's our pride. And if ye attack her, we're still of her side, which nobody can deny, which nobody can deny. So we'll join in her lawsuits to baffle all those who to get what she has will be often her foes. For we know it must all be our own when she goes, which nobody can deny, which nobody can deny.
This is a Baroque guitar, known to colonists simply as guitar. It was expensive, comparatively rare, and always this fancy. In the 1760s, guitars had 10 gut strings in 5 courses, similar to a modern 12-string guitar without the lowest E strings. The frets were tied gut around the neck. Over the next 65 years, the guitar would transition to a 6-stringed instrument that was also less expensive and elaborate, thus more accessible and popular. We go now to Boston in April 1775, the shot heard round the world. This next tune is known as the First March of the American Revolution because it was played by a fifer from Acton, Massachusetts on his way to Lexington and Concord.
The tune that he chose to play is called the White Cockade. A cockade is a ribbon decoration on a man's cocked hat, and if one chooses to have a white one as opposed to some color, it symbolizes sympathy with the Scottish separatists, quite appropriate as America was about to separate from Great Britain.
ended up being overwhelmed by the American farmers and militiamen, and they retreated to their garrison in Boston. When the news began to spread, Bostonians took great glee in hearing of the embarrassment of the British troops. Knowing that the militiamen either didn't know or didn't care about that rule of warfare that mandates that you stop shooting when your enemy is running away, the street poet who wrote our next song realized that the British were not being shot in the honorable side of their bodies. And he wrote this next song, The Irishman's Epistle to the Officers and Troops at Boston. For concord by discord could never be beaten. By my faith, but I think you're all makers of bulls, with your brains in your breeches, your guts and your skulls. Get home with your muskets and put up your swords and look in your books for the meaning of words.
You see now, my honeys, how much you're mistaken, for concord by discord could never be beaten. You see now, my honeys, how much you're mistaken, for concord by discord could never be beaten.
How brave you went out with your muskets all bright, and thought to be frightened the folks with the fight. But when you got there, how they powdered your palms, and all the way home, how they peppered your bums.
And is it not, honeys, a comical farce to be proud in your face and be shot in the arse? Is it not, honeys, a comical farce to be proud in your face and be shot in the arse?
How come you to think now they did not know how to be after their firelocks as smartly as you? Why, you see now, my honeys, 'tis nothing at all but to pull at the trigger and pop goes the ball. And what have you got now with all your designing but a town without victuals to sit down and dine in, and to look on the ground like a parcel of noodles, and sing how the Yankees have beaten the Doodles?
I'm sure if your wife you'll make peace for a dinner, for fighting and fasting will soon make you thinner. To look on the ground like a parcel of noodles, and sing how the Yankees have beaten the Doodles.
That tune may be familiar to some of you. It was certainly familiar to most, if not all, the colonists. The tune is an old Irish melody, commonly referred to as a lily burlero. Parody, the composing of new songs to existing popular melodies, was how new songs were written in early America. Most printing presses here didn't have musical type, so if your new song was a parody, you could publish it with very little expense as a broadside or even in the newspaper. The melody for our next song is the British Grenadiers, the sacred melody of the British Army.
So, to take a sacred melody of your enemy and write new words against your enemy is a very powerful tool indeed. And in this particular case, the British Grenadiers, we sang here as British subjects during the French and Indian Wars, but by 1774 we were putting anti-taxation words to that tune. By 1776 appears what is likely, statistically, the most popular song of the American Revolution. We're about to sing it. It's General Washington, or War and Washington, to the tune of the British Grenadiers. Vain Britons boast no longer with proud indignity. By land your conquering legions, your matchless strength at sea. Since we your sons incensed, our swords have girded on. Huzzah, 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 huzzah for war and Washington. Still deaf to mild entreaties, still blind to England's good. You have for 30 pieces betrayed your country's blood. Like Aesop's cur you'll gain but a shadow for your bone. Yet find us fearful shades indeed, inspired by Washington. Mysterious, unexampled, incomprehensible, the blundering schemes of Britain their downfall will foretell. like lions roar and grumble. Mere asses have ye shown, and ye shall share an ass's fate and drudge for Washington. Great heaven, is this the nation whose thundering arms were hurled through Europe, Africa, India, whose navy ruled the world? What a luster of your former deeds, whole ages of renown, should be lost in a moment or transferred to us in Washington. Yet think not thirst of glory unsheathes our vengeful swords, to rend your bands asunder and cast away your cords. 'Tis heaven-born freedom fires us all and strengthens each brave son, from him who humbly guides the plow to God like Washington. Fired with that great idea, our father's shades would rise, to view the stern contention, the gods desert the skies. And wolf, mid hosts of heroes, superior bending down, cry out with eager transport, well done, brave Washington.
This instrument was popular in the mid-18th century and was called an English guitar, or more commonly simply guitar. It meets no current definition of guitar, mostly because it's not a wasted instrument. It was actually a retuned version of an ancient instrument called a cittern, C-I-T-T-E-R-N. It's important because it was a popular instrument played only by women. It was significantly less expensive and therefore more accessible than a harpsichord, the only other instrument that was fashionable for women to play. Like the Baroque guitar, or the man's guitar, this one has 10 strings, but they're metal instead of gut. It's in 6 courses, not 5, and it's tuned to an open C chord.
We historians know it was very popular amongst upper-class women because of the many newspaper advertisements for these kinds of guitars for sale, for music to be played upon them, for instruction upon them, but most importantly because of the many paintings that were done, portraits taken of women such as Mrs. Edward Lloyd IV of Maryland, as depicted by Charles Willson Peale, playing a guitar just as handsomely as Ginger is holding hers at the moment. 2 quick instrumental pieces on the English guitar and the English flute. That's what they called the recorder back then. The first, Lady Washington, is a folk song about Martha, and the second is a tune from Martha's music book, one of several that she had and played from herself at Mount Vernon.
This is the only gender-correct instrumentation that we have all evening. As we celebrate the centennial of the 19th Amendment giving women the right to vote, we must acknowledge Mary Wollstonecraft, who wrote the first great feminist document, The Vindication of the Rights of Women, in Britain in 1792, on the heels of Thomas Paine's Rights of Man. That document, as well as our next song, clearly of the same mindset, was at least as radical a statement for its time as was Paine's. God save each female's right, show to her ravaged sight, woman is free. Let freedom's voice prevail and draw aside the veil. Supreme effulgence hail, sweet liberty. Man boasts the noble cause, nor yields supine to laws tyrants ordain. Let woman have a share, nor yield to slavish fear. Her equal rights declare and well maintain. Oh, let the sacred fire of freedom's voice inspire a female too. Man makes the cause his own and fame his acts renown. Woman, thy fears disown, assert thy due. Why should a woman lie in base obscurity, her talents hid? Has Providence assigned her soul to be confined? Is not her gentle mind by virtue led? Let snarling cynics frown, their maxims I disown, their ways detest. By man your tyrant lord, females no more be awed. Let freedom's sacred word inspire your breast.
A particularly musical gathering of the French and American officers before Yorktown occurred up in Philadelphia in late 1781. It was a presentation of a grand oratorio compiled by Francis Hopkinson. He took a number of melodies, some of them from George Frederick Handel and other famous classical composers, and he wrote new words, entitling the work The Temple of Minerva. And it was all about these symbolic mythical figures representing France and America and freedom and so forth. This next piece features a single verse set to an older tune from that gathering, followed by three newer verses specifically for George Washington, composed in the 1790s. Arise, arise, your voices raise, and swell the solemn hymn of praise at great Minerva's awful shrine. Bow down and own the power divine. Bow down, bow down, bow down, bow down, bow down and own the power divine. He comes, the hero comes. Sound your trumpets, beat your drums. His ranks advance in bright array. The hero of America. Welcome, 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 hero of America. He comes, 'tis mighty Washington. Words fail to tell all he has done. Our hero, guardian, father, friend, his fame can never, never end. Hero, guardian, father, friend, his fame can never, never end. Now freedom has our wishes crowned. Let flowing goblets pass around. We'll drink to freedom's favorite son. Health, peace, and joy to Washington. Drink to freedom's favorite son. Health, peace, and joy to Washington. I mentioned before that the harpsichord plucks its strings. This fact limits the instrument to playing always at the same volume. If I hit the keys hard, it sounds like that. If I press them as gently as I can to still pluck, it sounds just the same. In other words, you can't control the volume of the instrument from the keyboard. That's why the piano was invented. Around 1700, an Italian by the name of Cristofori invented a way to have a keyboard instrument, instead of plucking the strings, to hammer the strings. And that's what put the harpsichords out of business by around 1800 or sooner. Anyway, let's take a look inside mine and see how it works. I've removed the jack rail. The jack rail covers the jacks so that they don't bounce up too high when you pluck them. The jack sits on the back of the key simply by gravity. And I can take it out and show you what on the jack. This little perpendicular piece on a modern instrument is plastic, but on an original would be quill from a feather. And this little thing is responsible for plucking, just like your fingernail or a little guitar pick. As the jack is pushed up past the string, you get the sound, and when it drops back, the dampers, the red felt, these things stop the strings from sounding like that. Okay, so anyway, this harpsichord is a spinet. A spinet is a smaller version of the grand harpsichord. Just like today we have upright pianos and grand pianos. Back then, colonists ordered spinets by mid-century. Later in the century, as they became more wealthy, more commonly they would get grand harpsichords, the Washingtons, the Jeffersons, the Charles Carroll family of Maryland. They all had instruments that instead of a single keyboard, they had two keyboards, kind of like an organ today. They also had 3 sets of jacks and 3 sets of strings. The grand harpsichords were huge. The strings were swung out over, heading straight away, perpendicular from the keyboard, whereas the strings are condensed here in the spinet. By having all these different strings and jacks and keyboards, you could compete with these pianos that were starting to drive the harpsichord makers out of business by coming up with a variety of sounds, muffled sounds, bright sounds. In fact, some even experimented, such as the Washington harpsichord that's still at Mount Vernon, with the Venetian louvers that would open and close by a foot pedal. So while you're playing, you could mimic a quiet sound and a louder sound and grades in between. We've talked about parody, and we've performed a bunch of parodies, but by far the king of the most parodized melodies was Yankee Doodle. No one knows exactly where Yankee Doodle came from. It emerges in the 1760s, apparently already known by many people. But it took on a character role as the typical melody to use when you really wanted to rub it into somebody. You wanted to make fun of them. And that's precisely what this Yankee Doodle parody is all about. This represents the high moment of the American and French officers who would later form the Society of Cincinnati as they accepted the sword of resignation of Lord Cornwallis down at Yorktown. And it's extremely clever. If you follow these words, they liken the honors of the dance floor to those of the battlefield. Indeed, the title as this circulated through newspapers was The Dance, a ballad to the tune of Yankee Doodle. Cornwallis Wallace led a country dance, the like was never seen, sir. Much retrograde and much advance, and all with General Greene, sir. They rambled up, they rambled down, joined hands and off they run, sir. Our General Greene to Charleston, the Earl to Wilmington, sir. Yankee Doodle, keep it up, Yankee Doodle dandy. By the music and the step, and with the girls be handy. Greene in the South and danced a set and got a mighty name, sir. Cornwallis jigged with young Fayette, but suffered in his fame, sir. Then down he figured to the shore, most like a lordly dancer, and on his courtly honor swore he would no more advance, sir. Yankee Doodle, keep it up, Yankee Doodle dandy. By the music and the step, and with the girls be handy. And Washington, Columbia's son, whom easy nature taught, sir, that grace which can't by pains be won, or Pluto's gold be bought, sir. So hand in hand they circle round this ever-dancing pier, sir. Their gentle movements soon confound the Earl as they draw near, sir. Yankee Doodle, keep it up, Yankee Doodle dandy. By the music and the step, and with the girls be handy. Well, his music soon forgets to play, his feet can move no more, sir. All his bands now curse the day they jigged it to our shore, sir. So Tories all, what can you say? Come, is this not a griper? That while your hopes are danced away, 'tis you must pay the piper. Yankee Doodle, keep it up, Yankee Doodle dandy. By the music and the step, and with the girls be handy. As immigrants flooded into North America in the 17th and 18th century, many of them brought with them their musical cultures, of course, from England and Scotland and Ireland, and to some extent, France. Among the materials that came with these settlers was nothing like that which arrived on the shores with the arrival of slavery. And as horrible as that institution is and remains the scars so deep today, in music history, the elements of African music represent a central core in what would become American music. And those are elements such as rhythmic complexity and layered rhythms, polyrhythms, a call and response singing back and forth, the use of what's called a blues scale today, where certain notes are a little bit ambiguous. You'll hear all of those things in this next piece. This is an early spiritual that was collected in Virginia in the 1820s or so. And we believe it gives a good taste of this specific genre of music that arose on the fields, out in the tobacco plantations and beyond, as African Americans were struggling through slavery and finding music as a way out to help. Don't be weary, traveler, come along home to Jesus. Don't be weary, traveler, come along home to Jesus.
My head got wet with the midnight dew. Come along home to Jesus.
Come along,
Angels bear me witness to come along home to Jesus.
don't be weary, traveler, come along home to Jesus. Don't be weary, traveler,
Come along home to Jesus. Where to go I did not know. Come along home to Jesus.
come along.
Ever since he freed my soul, come along home to Jesus.
Don't be weary, traveler, come along home to Jesus. Don't be weary, traveler, come along home to Jesus.
I looked at the world and the world looked new. Come along home to Jesus.
Come along
I looked at the world and the world looked new. Come along home to Jesus.
Don't be weary, traveler, come along home to Jesus. Don't be weary, traveler, come along home to Jesus.
This instrument is a hammered dulcimer. Its history goes back to the 12th century, and it was played in the colonies beginning in 1719. We don't have proof that there were more than a handful of these instruments in the colonies, but they were in the hands of itinerant professional male musicians, whose livelihood depended on them attracting audiences from the many towns that they visited. It's very possible then that many more colonists saw this instrument being played than saw the harpsichords, which stayed in the homes of the wealthy.
Independence Day celebrations featured public gatherings and considerable amount of drinking. So here's a great drinking song for you. It pertains to Benjamin Franklin, the statesman, scientist, inventor, philosopher, composer, inventor of a musical instrument. There were even songs written about Franklin, and this drinking song was written about him by a French priest in 1779. Franklin had long been a hit in Paris and thereabouts, and people loved him. They decided to throw him a big party, and this song was composed for that occasion. We'll sing it in English. The words tell the stories of the major world powers and their national beverages, and how we should raise a glass to Ben. Let the learned all acclaim Franklin's glory and his fame. I myself his winning ways in a drinking song shall praise. Come, let's raise our glass and then sing the praises of our Ben. Raise, raise the glass and then sing the praises of our Ben. British lords of high degree tried to keep the Yanks to tea. Sold 'em wine not worth a bubble, charged 'em prices more than double. Come, let's raise our glass and then sing the praises of our Ben. Raise, raise the glass and then sing the praises of our Ben. Why does Congress go to war? Wine is well worth fighting for, and if they win, the Yanks will gain a supply of French champagne. Come, let's raise our glass and then sing the praises of our Ben. Raise, raise the glass and then sing the praises of our Ben. See our heroes as they go to the battle against the foe. 'Tis to help the nation dine with the aid of Catholic wine. Come, let's raise our glass and then sing the praises of our Ben. Raise, raise the glass and then sing the praises of our Ben. Nor need we our troops command to debark on English land. Why should we the English fear when their only drink is beer? Come, let's raise our glass and then sing the praises of our Ben. Raise, raise the glass and then sing the praises of our Ben. When we triumph in the end, we shall make the foe our friend, and to the conquered English host we'll propose this friendly toast. Yankee Doodle went to town riding on his pony. Raise, raise the glass and then sing the praises of our Ben.
The hammered dulcimer might look complex, but the idea is rather simple. It's not linear like a piano, but the scale is a box with the white bridges at the corners. I have 8 of these boxes because I can play on both sides of this bridge on the left. Although the scales are diatonic, if I needed a sharper flat outside the scale, I can borrow it from one of the other keys or boxes. What allows for this whole idea of playing on either side of the box is that the strings cross here between the bridges. So this string cannot be played at this bridge because it is too far below the other strings to be accessible by the hammer. So this low string here is the high string over here. I need to make sure then that when playing the instrument, I'm looking at the bridges rather than the strings. Hammer dulcimer.
Taxes, always an issue, and especially an issue in the 1760s, when Americans found themselves being charged with all sorts of taxes and duties by British Parliament, attempting to recoup their cost of fighting against the French and Indians. Well, this hit women in particular as the managers of the households, those who were required to keep things in stock, to order new finished goods from London in exchange for the lumber and tobacco and other raw goods we were shipping over that direction. Well, in the 1760s, of course, there was defiance against these taxes. We tarred and feathered the tax collectors. We threw the tea in Boston Harbor and Annapolis Harbor also, by the way. And Americans wrote a song. Someone anonymously published a new set of lyrics, taking an older tune known as Advice to the Ladies, changing it to the title The Address to the Ladies, and in this song advising them, instead of purchasing these taxed, finished British goods, instead buy homespun American cloth and American tea, and things that don't support the British cause as we try to defy them. The Address to the Ladies. Young ladies in town and those that live round, let a friend at this season advise you. Since money's so scarce and time's growing worse, strange things may soon happen, surprise you. First then toss aside your high top knots of pride, wear none but your own country linen. Of economy boast, let your pride be the most, to show clothes of your own make and spinning. What of homespun they say is not quite so gay as brocades, yet be not in a passion. For when once it is known this is much war in town, one and all will cry out 'tis the fashion. And as one will agree that you'll not married be to such as will wear London factory. But at first sight refuse, tell them such you do choose, and encourage our own manufactory. Ribbons wear, nor in rich silks appear. Love your country must better than fine things. Begin without passion, 'twill soon be the fashion to grace your smooth locks with a twine string. These do without fear, for charming you'll appear, fair, charming, true, lovely, and clever. Though the times remain darkish, young men may be sparkish, and love you much stronger than ever. Our next song is about Stephen Decatur, an American hero of several wars, a naval hero. Born on the eastern shore of Maryland, he became a member of the Society of the Cincinnati. In fact, he'll rattle off the names of some other fellow members in the last verse of the song we're about to sing, which is yet another parody. Most Americans knew this tune under the title Liberty Tree during the American Revolution. But it predates that. It's an older English tune entitled Ye Gods of the Greeks. Today, though, this is the version, the parody that honors Decatur, and it's known as Decatur and the Navy. Let glory proclaim to the hills of the west the triumphs of freedom afar. Our song be Decatur and liberty blessed, huzzah for the brave and the war. The gallant commander and aid his brave band rejoice at the sight of the foe. 3 cheers give the signal, each heart and each hand conspires to strike the firm blow. Then furious the cannon's fierce thundering roar, death speedily follows the blaze. The dead and the dying were covered with gore, while freedom the contest surveys. Sweet goddess that guides us to glory and fame, and rides in the terrible blast. And now to Decatur a glorious name, that long as his country shall last. The fierce Macedonian soon yields to her foe, she yields to the gallant and brave. Success to our sailors wherever they go, and in death sweet peace to their grave. Huzzah to the brave that triumphantly ride, and traverse the boisterous sea. Columbia's glory, her honor and pride, and freedom's fair bulwark shall be. The tars of Columbia were born to be brave, their birthright is liberty blessed. To shield it from insult, from ruin to save, shall long be the pride of each breast. Then hail to our Navy, all hail in a bumper, Decatur, Jones, Porter, and Hull. May Rogers soon meet with the fierce roving Plumper, and drub his old friend Johnny Bull.
There are many Americans who are less than proud to learn that our national anthem's melody was originally an English drinking song, but parody. In the late 1760s, a group of London gentlemen formed a club in what was a long upper-class tradition both in England and in her colonies. These men met weekly or bi-monthly to sing, play music, write poetry, and drink large amounts of alcohol. For this particular London club, though, they thought themselves worthy of a better name than their predecessors. The Tuesday Club was too pedestrian, they thought. So they took as the name of their club the Anacreontic Society, after the ancient Greek poet Anacreon, who wrote his poems mostly about love and about wine. But their cleverness didn't stop there. They wrote a song asking Anacreon in heaven if he would be their sponsor. And in the song, Anacreon sings back, yes, if you will also espouse my ideals of women and of wine, of Venus and of Bacchus.
And they published this song around 1779 in London. That's the same year, 79, when Francis Scott Key was born here on this side of the ocean in Frederick County, Maryland. And the story of the coming together of this man and that melody takes some time. It's a fascinating story. But in very brief, Key as a young man came to Annapolis to study at St. John's College, where the song was published and performed in the city of Annapolis. He practiced law later on in Georgetown, and by 1805, he wrote his first parody of the Anacreontic song to honor Stephen Decatur, who had returned from the Barbary Wars. It would be fun to trace and tell you all these details, but let's close with just 3 samples. We'll do the first of 6 verses of the original drinking song. Then we'll do the first of 9 verses of the most important American parody of the late 18th century. That's a song called Adams and Liberty. And we'll close honoring George Washington. In that same year, 1798, of Adams and Liberty, was published a song by a woman in Boston, Susanna Rowson, honoring Washington's birthday. And with this, we close. To Anacreon in heaven, where he sat in full glee, a few sons of harmony sent a petition, that he their inspirer and patron should be. When this answer arrived from that jolly old Grecian, voice, fiddle, and flute no longer be mute, I'll lend you my name and inspire you to boot. And besides, I'll instruct you like me to entwine the myrtle of Venus with Bacchus's vine. And besides, I'll instruct you like me to entwine the myrtle of Venus with Bacchus's vine. Ye sons of Columbia, who bravely have fought for those rights which unstained from your sires had descended, may you long taste the blessings your valor has bought, and your sons reap the soil which your fathers defended. Mid the reign of mild peace may your nation increase, with the glory of Rome and the wisdom of Greece. And ne'er may the sons of Columbia be slaves, while the earth bears a plant or the sea rolls its waves. And ne'er may the sons of Columbia be slaves, while the earth bears a plant or the sea rolls its waves. Jove, pleased with the prospect, majestic arose, and said, by ourself they shall not be neglected, but ever secure, though surrounded by foes, by Washington bravely upheld and protected. And while peace and plenty preside o'er their plains, while memory exists or while gratitude reigns. His name ever loved and remembered shall be, while Colombians remain independent and free. His name ever loved and remembered shall be, while Colombians remain independent and free.
Play ball.
And thank you very much for joining us. Happy Independence Day.
So I am here with David and Ginger, and they have agreed to answer a few questions submitted by our audience. Submitted by Paul and Sarah from Bowie, Maryland. What caused colonial music to go out of fashion? When and how was it eclipsed by other forms of music after the Revolution? What kind of music came after colonial music faded from public view and acceptance?
So, okay. Most colonial music didn't really go out of fashion. There are plenty of colonial tunes that we still sing today. For instance, Nancy Dawson, which was a common marching and dance tune. It went like this. Which, of course, is Here We Go Round the Mulberry Bush.
Or This Is the Way We Tie Our Shoes. Lazy Mary, Will You Get Up? I saw 3 ships come sailing in on Christmas Day. And even The Wheels in the Bus Go Round and Round is really similar to it as well.
And maybe this tune too, La Belle Catherine, a really simple children's dance. Do you know the Muffin Man? Everybody knows that tune. And here's one last. This one was called Marlbrook. Which of course is for He's a Jolly Good Fellow, and The Bear Went Over the Mountain. So over and over, these are tunes that remain parodized even today. Now, of course, things do change. The sound of music changes. Harpsichords went out of fashion and pianos came into fashion. And of course, brass instruments changed because
Bells.
But that the colonial music didn't necessarily fade doesn't mean, of course, that new sounds were not embraced. The 19th century brought parlor music, and that was more romanticized and tear-jerky generally. And then, of course, the rhythms and scales of African music were so enticing, even in the 18th century where it was kept separate. Then in the 19th century, the eventual marriage of African and European musical styles, that would become ragtime and jazz and rock and roll. And those are the sounds that define American music today, and that we can all be very proud of.
Submitted by Jenny from Washington, D.C. Can you please share any specific songs that were enjoyed by troops during the American Revolution? How was music used by troops and commanders during battle? Were there any specific instruments that were a standard part of troops and camps?
We already did. Certainly, the Yankee Doodle parody that we sang about the surrender at Yorktown, I guarantee you that those guys sang snippets, if not much of that piece, as they were marching back from Yorktown. Very much a soldiering song. Additionally, the General Washington, or War in Washington, platoon of British Grenadiers. This arguably, if we look at colonial American newspapers, we look at other primary source materials that indicate the popularity of songs, this would have been the top choice. Interestingly, if we go back to the French and Indian War period, though, we find that original tune the British Grenadiers recorded in a manuscript at Fort William Henry, which is the setting of The Last Mohicans, the story of the French and Indian War. And of course, at that time, North Americans considered themselves British subjects. So they used the original British Grenadiers that's all pro-Britain, as opposed to this anti-British, pro-Washington song that we sang in our program. There's all kinds of other cool stuff, too, from a manuscript preserved by an amateur fiddler, an officer in the Continental Army named George Bush, believe it or not, Captain Bush of Delaware. He notated some of the songs that he knew the soldiers enjoyed, songs like How Stands the Glass Around, which is a drinking song, or The Drum, which describes, we've recorded many of these, the drum describes sort of the functionality of the drum, which leads me to the next part of the question, and that is, how is music used? Is definitely used as a form of communication. During the heat of battle, musket shots, cannon, yelling, screaming, people spread over large distances. The drum specifically became an instrument of communication, such that signal patterns would be called for by the officers. The drummers would beat those patterns, they'd repeat them through the field of battle, and these instructions would register to the soldiers, oh, that means retreat, or oh, that means fire at will, and those signals overflowed not just from the battlefield, but into the campground. The drummers, and when they had them, fifers, could play the calls for gathering water, gathering firewood, going to bed. Tap 2 is to turn the taps 2 on the keg, so they have to stop drinking and go to bed on the camp field. Reveille is a drum signal, and we know that as the buglers carried on that tradition into the current times. So, communication was a hugely important thing, and the guys who did that were enlisted as privates. These were actually members of the army who were paid as musicians to practice, drill. They had other duties as well. Musicians got to bury the dead, for instance. We always get the best stuff left over. But aside from that, the officers hired private bands of music. I know that sounds redundant, but a band of music, or Harmonie Musik, that's the German term for it, described a group of private citizens who were hired out of the pockets of the officers. The French had them, the British, the Hessians, the Americans, officers, we like to be serenaded at dinner time, or we'd like to have formal music played for dancing. So these guys would play indoor instruments like the violin and flute, but they would also play out-of-door instruments for ceremony, such as the oboe, the bassoon, the clarinet, the horn. This predates the all-brass bands of the 19th century and Civil War period.
Why was it unfashionable for women to play the violin?
I got this one. Okay. I maintain that we are all beholden to fashion and have been for centuries. Take the clothing, right? In the 18th century, women wanted to be as flat as possible and as wide as possible. I am wearing pillows and stays. We think that that's crazy. But our current efforts to appear the opposite of flat and wide are decidedly more crazy than that.
That's fashion for you.
It does change. As for the appropriateness of instruments, there's nothing inherently unladylike about playing the violin. So really, it's just fashion. What's considered ladylike can also easily change over time. Remember also this very important thing, that in the 18th century, there was a lot more to lose. Your ability to maintain your reputation meant that you could marry well. And that was, for a woman, that was the only way that she could do well financially. So to lose my reputation would be reason enough for me to choose a different instrument when I was young, or to make sure that I bought my daughter an instrument that I could be proud to watch her play.
Submitted by Christopher from Arlington, Virginia. What are the important lessons students and young people can learn from colonial music? Do you have any recommendations for teachers hoping to incorporate this music in the classroom?
This is so central, Christopher. Thank you for raising both of these. The main function to me in terms of studying history at all is to reinforce our sense of humanity, reinforce our understanding, our feeling of being a part of a continuum, where there's something in human nature, for instance, that evidences love or anger, or we find songs then expressing these kinds of things. People get upset, they protest. We've seen a lot of protests lately in the streets. And we did the Address to the Lady, which is really a song of protest from the 1760s. The whole idea that music can change awareness, it can raise awareness and bring about change that it can tie us back, educate us about things. We've looked a lot at the history of African Americans in North America. And there's much that can be learned from the study of those who were enslaved. As horrible as it was, it's a part of our history. And as I believe I mentioned when we sang our spiritual, it's that music of Africa that became the essential ingredient that peppers and enlivens and makes American music as we think of it today: jazz, ragtime, rock and roll, rap, all that stuff. It's just such an important thing. I'm wondering, to the second part of Christopher's question, I can rattle off a few things, and perhaps we could maybe add a screen with some websites listed at the very end of the program. For instance, there's a place called Voices Across Time that was set up. I was one of the contributors. This is out at the University of Pittsburgh, where they gathered materials, musical materials, and tried to line them up with the themes of American history: political history, religious history, social history, technological advancing. All of those ways that history is broken up into units for teaching. They hired people like us, specialists in their fields, to contribute music, not just from those fields, but from the different periods of time. So you have a sort of a crosshatch network. Mount Vernon has accepted the gifting of our Colonial Music Institute. When Ginger and I eventually retire, we want the Colonial Music Institute to live on. And so they'll be maintaining and increasing the databases for research that we provide, the FAQs and essays that address a lot of the detailed questions that come through Q&As like this. Musicalpassage.org is all about the earliest recorded African music down in the Caribbean. Don't use Wikipedia. Be careful going out and just saying, oh, this must be a colonial tune, because there's a lot of really schlocky, half-hearted research that's posted out on the internet. So the more you learn about it, you just be careful with that kind of stuff. That's my advice.
What was the instrument that Benjamin Franklin invented?
I'm prepared. Not because it's happy hour, but if you look at colonial American newspapers, there were a handful of touring performers on the musical glasses. And the musical glasses were glasses that were made musical. As you know, you can rub your finger. Could you hold the bass a little bit? There you go. Can you hear that? That's one pitch. If you take a similar glass and you pour some water in it, and then you'll get a different pitch. Da-dum. We have two pitches of the scale. If you stick a bunch of these glasses into a box and you get really good at keeping your fingers moist, reaching in and rubbing around and playing them, you can do melodies like and so forth. Well, Franklin, the genius that he was, observed performances on the musical glasses when he was in England. At the same time that he recorded that song we sang in our program, The Mother Country. On that same trip, he observed the musical glasses and thought, you guys are doing this the hard way. Why rub your fingers around the glasses? Why don't you mount the glasses all concentrically, like big fish eats little fish, on a spindle? Get the spindle to spin like with a foot pedal, and then you dip your fingers in water and you just touch the tops of the instruments. He called it the glass harmonica, A-R-M-O-N-I-C-A. And it's a cool instrument. We included a couple of tracks, or one actually by Mozart, composed for this instrument. It was so popular in 18th century Europe. So that's Franklin's instrument, and there are a handful of them still in use around the country, not too many.
Submitted by Dave from Nashville, Tennessee. What inspired your interest in colonial music? Do you have a favorite piece of music from this era?
This is a story that's a little bit hard to tell in brief, but I'll do my very best. Ginger and I met in college many years ago. And we played in coffee houses, and we had the guitars and the fiddles, and we did James Taylor and all that kind of stuff, Beatles songs. And we still do that for fun. But one summer, we decided, hey, let's go around Annapolis, my hometown. Let's spend the summer playing in bars and restaurants. And so we're out doing our Beatles and James Taylor just a few nights into the summer, and someone says, hey, you know any colonial music?
We're like, what's that?
It's like, and we just sort of brushed it off. And then another night or two later, someone goes, hey, this is a colonial town. Do you do any colonial music? And we kind of looked at each other, and by the third time someone asked us, we had sent away for a book of colonial songs from Williamsburg. And we'd made some really cheesy outfits that I had like a leather vest and a puffy shirt. And we made some cheesy outfits. And by the middle of the summer, we're doing colonial music. And there was demand for it. People were interested in it. And so,
we loved it.
Yeah, because of the kinds of things I said before, because they connect us to our inner humanness that you find, again, the love, the humor, the emotion. You find the political actions through the music of the period. And we got pulled into it such that eventually when I had the opportunity to do graduate work, I did my master's and doctorate on colonial music in Annapolis. And the rest that's been our specialty for decades and decades now.
And yes, we do have a favorite.
Well, I hope we're still in tune.
This is actually a tune that didn't make it onto our program tonight. It's called Over the Hills and Far Away. It was part of the ballad opera, the Beggar's Opera of 1728, popular for a century.
Just one verse.
Right.
Were I laid on Greenland's coast, and in my arms embraced my lass, warm amidst eternal frost, too soon the half-year's night would pass, and I would love thee every day. Every night we'd kiss and play, if with me you'd fondly stray, over the hills and far away.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us tonight. Take care.
Thank you for joining us for our 2nd of July celebration of the Women's Suffrage Centennial. To learn more about our work, visit us online at AmericanRevolutionInstitute.org.